When they're not ready examples of people who look like you doing what you do, people conflate that with the expectation that you shouldn't be doing it either, right? Mm-hmm. And it takes some determination to push through that and to put yourself in a space where you're often made to feel like maybe you don't belong there, right? So I think that can feel discouraging, but I think it can also feel like a challenge. You know, if you're that kind of stubborn person, it feels like a challenge. And there are those among us, myself included, who like to rise to that challenge.
Her name was Emilie.
Hi everybody! Welcome back to the SituAsian Room, a journey into Asian America. We dive deep into the issues in the Asian American community, from questions like, where are you really from? And representation, to sharing food and our own experiences. My name is Emilie Villaverde.
And I'm Zach King. This week we have an awesome episode to bring you guys. We are talking to Dr. Michelle Au, who is running for the Georgia State Senate in District 48.
I'm really excited about this interview, guys. It was so great. It was really nice getting to know Michelle and hearing her story, and I'm really excited for you guys to dive into this interview. But before that, Zach, we have a newsletter.
We do.
So guys, don't forget to sign up for our newsletter to get all the updates on the SituAsian Room. You can do this by going to our website or in our show notes to sign up. There's going to be some cool stuff. We're going to be making exclusive content just for the people on our newsletter. So definitely sign up. Don't miss out.
Yes, it's going to be an awesome opportunity. And so actually on the news, speaking of newsletter, in Texas's 22nd congressional district, Sri Kulkarni is campaigning for Congress to flip the seat. He ran the last election cycle but lost by 5 points. He's working to flip the seat, and his campaign is campaigning in 21 different languages, and I think he speaks 6 himself.
Wow.
I think he used to be in the Foreign Service. Yeah, he's a diplomat. But he is turning out the AAPI vote like no one else. We talk about this a little bit in our interview about the importance of language access and how to get Asian Americans to turn out. And Sri Kulkarni is an incredible guy. I really hope he wins, but he is really organizing the Asian American community in Texas.
That's crazy. 22 languages? Oh, 21 different languages.
Yeah, it's incredible. But in more news too, Lifetime is going to produce the first holiday film centered on an Asian American family called A Sugar and Spice Holiday, and it's going to star Tai Ma. I don't know. Have you heard?
No, I don't know. I don't really know a whole bunch.
I am super excited. Tai Ma's been like in a million things. He's the dad of Mulan. He is the ambassador in Rush Hour. He was in Tiger Tail, the lead. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's really cool. I like that they're starting to incorporate, representation of different cultures into that traditional holiday aspect.
Yeah, there's going to be Asians behind the camera, Asians in front of the camera. We're excited.
Oh, that's awesome. In other news, this is really cool. The House passes a resolution to denounce the racism towards Asian Americans that have risen as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And when I read this week, I was kind of excited. I was really excited about this because, we have heard and we've discussed on this show before different acts of racism against Asian Americans due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So the fact that something is being done about this is really, really great news. So the measure demands the condemnation of all forms of racism and scapegoating, and calls on public officials to denounce any anti-Asian sentiment. So while this legislation won heavy Democratic support, it also got some backing from the Republican Party, and it passed 243 to 164, which is amazing.
Yeah, I think Representative Grace Meng was one of the leaders, and Judy Chu as well.
Yeah, I believe Grace Meng, she commented on this when NBC Asian America did their article on it, and she said the House said enough, which I agree wholeheartedly. It's about time that something is done with all of the anti-Asian racism that's been existing, more so due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, Grace Meng is also a queen. She's a champion, for Asian Americans. On the related topic, the Stop AAPI Hate Youth campaign found that 25% of Asian American youth experienced racist bullying, and much of it's related to pandemic. So, I mean, this resolution comes in at a good time, but we're going to need more of the resolution.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, but enough of the news. Let's get into our topic interview, talking about running for office with Dr. Michelle Au. Right, welcome to Dr. Michelle Au into the SituAsian Room. We are so excited to have you. And so before we get started, tell us about yourself and a little bit about your background.
Okay, so thank you so much, Zach and Emily, for having me on. My name is Dr. Michelle Au, and I'm a physician in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm running for Georgia State Senate in District 48, which includes a very big swath of North Fulton and Gwinnett counties, which are among the most populous in the state. So just a little bit of details about me. So I am a physician. I do have a master's degree in public health. And essentially, one of the things I get asked often is why I would be running. Essentially, I view my campaign as an extension of my Hippocratic Oath. And this is a view I'm going to explain in just a second. Pretty much early on into most people's medical careers, and I'm talking like by the middle of medical school, you really realize that a lot of the problems that our patients have and bring to us can't be fixed at the bedside. Because by the time they get to us, it's really too late in a lot of ways. Because in medicine, we can prescribe drugs or recommend treatments or do surgery and do all these things. But by the time the patients reach us at the hospital, we really can't fix a lot of the social determinants of health that made them very sick in the first place. So affecting changes to the social determinants of health, which are like access to health insurance, economic opportunity, education, public safety, these are all the purviews of government and government action. So it's at this government level that I really wanted to get involved. You guys might be aware of the Hippocratic Oath that everyone takes when they graduate from medical school. And the first tenet of that Hippocratic Oath is first, do no harm. So often we hear this and we think about active harms, like people, doing like surgical injury or medication errors or those types of things. But I think passive harms are often the ones that wreak the most damage. And those are the harms of inaction, not doing something. So you don't want your inaction to be part of the problem. Back to something a little bit more in line with the podcast and the themes that you guys like to talk about. Is my state Senate district really encompasses an area that's among the most diverse in Georgia. And I think a lot of times when people think about the South or they think about Georgia in specific, they have a certain dated or sort of stereotypical image of who exactly lives in Georgia. But these stereotypes simply don't apply for a very big part of the state. And my district is more than 24% Asian American Pacific Islander. So just to give some perspective, I grew up in Manhattan, New York with your aunt, Zach. And we think of that as a tremendously diverse county. But even in Manhattan, the population is less than 10% AAPI. So my district is incredibly diverse. So I think the population in this area, just as nationally, is really hungry for representation, elected representation that reflects the diverse face of this community. And so I think I'm that right candidate with that life right experience running at the right time. So that's just a little bit about me and why I'm here.
Awesome. Well, we are so excited to have you in the SituAsian Room today, Michelle. I'm going to kick off this interview with a couple questions. So when did you really get the idea of, running for office? Like, when did it first cross your mind?
Yeah, I think probably it first crossed my mind around November of 2016. And I think that, not to get too political about it, but you wake up after Election Day in 2016 and you realize that maybe whatever you'd been doing, no matter how much good you felt like you've been doing in your daily life, maybe isn't enough. So, you start to re-examine your usefulness in the world and how you could extend your skill level into helping more people at a time. So at that time, what I thought would be the best thing to do is I wanted to take care of more people at once. So not just one patient at a time at the bedside, but maybe take care of a lot of people or community-based health. So I decided at that time to go back to get my master's degree in public health. So when you get a public health degree, obviously it's to focus on community health, but you learn a lot of things that underlie the system in which I've been working in for more than a decade in the hospital. So you learn about healthcare policy, healthcare law, healthcare economics, all these things that really make the system run that you're not always entirely aware of or that are not always visible to you as a physician working in the system. So after getting that part of my education, I realized that the surest way to effect the kind of change that I was looking for, which is that those social determinants of health affecting those factors, was to get involved at the legislative level. So that's really the short story.
Awesome. Okay. And is there, is there anyone that really inspired you to run for office in the beginning?
I talked with a lot of different people before I decided to run because it did seem like kind of a wild pivot. It's not a normal thing, let's say, for someone sort of in the middle of their professional career as a physician to decide to run for office. But I did have a couple of contacts who were both legislatively involved and also doctors who had retired who had run for office. So I really talked to them first to decide, A, did they find this kind of work meaningful? Did they find that it was helping people? Did they find it satisfying after a medical career? How does it compare? And these people did give me, like the straight dope, like they didn't gloss over anything. They did give me the perspective that it can sometimes be frustrating and slower moving than we like, but that it ultimately does have the kind of impact that I'd be looking to have. So yeah, just other colleagues really.
Awesome. And I love that, when you said that you're like in the middle of, one profession and like you're in the middle of your career as a physician and then all of a sudden you just decided to do this. I think that's incredible. And the general election hasn't happened yet, but if you do win, you will be seen as a pioneer that opens the doors for more people in the Asian American and Pacific Islander community. Did you ever imagine that you'd be a pioneer? And how do you feel about this?
Thanks. That's a great question. And, I don't know that I necessarily think of myself as a pioneer in that there are other AAPI legislators, both in this state and in other states, who have had to break this same ground well before I've had to try to. But I think that politics and legislative action really isn't something I saw much growing up. So in that sense, I think it is, it feels new to me. Because if you had told me as a kid, as I was growing up, that I'd ever be running for office, I would have told you that you were crazy. It's not so much that I was told that I couldn't do it. It was never that explicit, but it's more that it never would have entered my mind to do it. It's not something that I saw modeled really. And there were really few, if really any, public examples of Asian American political leaders. Like if you think back, it's really only more recently that we've started seeing more AAPI people leading in politics. So I'm not the first Asian American woman to run for office, but I also don't intend to be the last, right? And I'd also like it if my kids and other people in their generation don't have to say that they didn't ever see examples of people doing the things that I'm trying to do. When a straight white dude runs for office, no one views it as a novelty act. No one like picks up on it as something that's tremendously different. So I'd like to be part of making this path a little bit more normal also for other Asian leaders in the future.
I like that. So on that topic, like Asian American voices have historically been not as loud as you were saying. Like, there are not many Asian American activists or political figures that we really know before until much recently. And so, often people tend to walk over Asian Americans in a way. And so, as we talked about, that's changing, especially recently. And how is running for office and increased representation altering the power of Asian American voices? And why is it important to amplify your voice?
Thank you. Great question. And this really comes back to this issue I was mentioning before in terms of the percentage of the electorate that is Asian, especially in my Senate district. So Asian Americans, as you may know, are the fastest growing segment of eligible voters out of all the major racial and ethnic groups in the United States. And this is why people are starting to pay attention a little bit more to what we hear about and what we have to say. Just to give the scope of this growth, between 2000 and 2020, the number of eligible Asian American voters has more than doubled. So we're making up nearly 5% now of the nation's eligible voters. We're also the only major racial or ethnic group in which naturalized citizens, meaning people who are born outside of the United States and are naturalized into the United States, make up a majority of the eligible voters. So that's different from other voting blocks. So being a significant voting bloc, especially in this electoral season, comes with some significant power, as you're alluding to. And the AAPI vote really has the potential to make a difference, especially in some key swing states like Georgia, because our voices and our votes also help move the discussion and force candidates of both parties really to consider their platforms on a number of important issues ranging from healthcare to education to immigration and all these things that are important to everyone. I also dare say that it really disadvantages parties that use inflammatory or divisive language about immigrants or who use casually racist language when discussing, for example, the coronavirus pandemic. because we are here and we're listening and we vote. Many of our families really came to this country in search of a better life and in search of opportunity. And what I think we're coming to realize as a community is that our civic engagement, what we give back, and the power of our votes is really part of shaping that better life that we want to see for ourselves and for our kids.
Awesome. And so you mentioned like the changing demographics and how, more than any other ethnic group, what drives the growth of Asian American eligible voters is naturalized citizens. And I think it's a really fascinating trend, especially in, as you say, swing states. Do you think that the changing demographics in Georgia, because to my memory, like, I don't think we usually consider Georgia a swing state. It's usually like a solidly red state. Do you think that these changing demographics and immigration is changing the narrative of how we look at Georgia in the South?
I think so. And, change is not always as fast as we want it to be. And sometimes we see it sort of in a time lapse, which is why I think that people are a little bit slow to catch on that Georgia is changing from the stereotypical view that we have of it being a very solidly red state. For example, my Senate district was pretty Republican for a long period of time, and it just flipped blue in 2018. And I think that part of this flipping blue was this growing diversity in the district and the increasing voices of the AAPI vote here, which does tend to somewhat lean more Democratic. So I think that these are the types of things that we see over time. And we have to pay attention to it, because I think sometimes we write off certain states, like states in the South, like Georgia, as presuming them to be in some sort of stasis ideologically. And that's just simply not the case, because the fact is that people who live in Georgia come from everywhere, just like in other states as well. So it's just a matter of attending to those changes, and attending to those differences, and being responsive to the community.
Awesome. Okay, yeah. So, for a lot of people in the Asian American community, being a doctor is regarded as one of the more stable / that quote unquote American dream job. I would know my parents, growing up, I was set up to think I need to pursue a medicine in the medical profession in order to be stable. But you took that big risk just to give it all up. Do you want to elaborate more as to, what your thought process was again, and, why you did this?
Sure, and I'm really glad you brought this up, because I really get asked this a lot. And one of the interesting and really beautiful things about running for state senate in the state of Georgia is that ours is a citizen legislature, which is designed to be a part-time job, right? So they actually designed the state legislature to meet only part of the year and to allow people to be part of the community and work in the community the rest of the time. So per the Georgia Constitution, the legislative session actually runs 40 working days per year, which allows all of us to sort of keep working our jobs if we still have jobs. Many of us are retired, of course, but not me, but other people are. But it allows us to keep one foot in society. Usually the legislative session runs between about mid-January to like beginning of April. And that's how that usually works. So I intend to keep practicing medicine, even though I'm obviously going to be scaling back some of my hospital hours if I'm in session. But this concept of a citizen legislature is really important, and it's important for legislatures to continue working in the real world, because it's important to remind yourself what motivated you to get involved in the first place. And helping our community, and in particular helping my patients, is part of that motivation. So I want to still be part of that every day.
Wow, I thank you for that answer. That was incredible. But as a doctor, and you're also the daughter of 2 doctors, and as someone who is chasing, that road less traveled, do you feel it's important for other Asian Americans to do the same and, give up these ideas of traditional stable jobs and chase something different?
I think that, I'm not going to tell other people what they should or shouldn't be doing, but I do think that people should not be constrained by the ideas of what they ought to do, or feel held back by the fact that they haven't seen other people do it before. So I think that's part of the importance of representation, is just carving out these paths for other people to make it a little bit easier for people to consider all possibilities and all spaces and all different ways to perform service and get involved. Because like I said, even if you're the first, you don't want to be the last, right? And the other important thing want to make people feel that all spaces are for them, right? This is a country that we came to because the promise of America is that opportunity is open for everyone who's willing to work for it, right? So we belong in all these spaces, and even if we haven't seen it before and even doesn't feel comfortable for us to push out, these spaces belong to us and our voices are important.
Awesome. Okay, guys, hold that thought. We're going to be right back. We're going to take a quick break for commercials.
Her name was Emilie. I don't know. She was very insistent.
Welcome back into the SituAsian Room. We are here with Dr. Michelle Au, who is running for Georgia State Senate in the 48th District. So I want to go a little backtrack a little bit, talk about your district and Asian Americans as a voting bloc. And so API voter turnout has historically been not great. In 2018, 42% of AAPIs voted compared to 57% whites, 51% Black, and 40% Latinx. And so why do you believe that voter turnout is so low, and what can we do to increase voter turnout? I know we talked about in the last segment how our demographic group has a lot of naturalized citizens. Do you think that's an aspect? We want to hear your thoughts.
Absolutely. So I think, I think about this a lot, obviously, living in the district I do and running for office. So I think there's really several key pieces to increasing AAPI voter turnout. The first piece is impressing on people the importance of voting, period. Okay, so that's one. The second thing is helping them vote, right? And the third thing is making sure those ballots are counted. So there's three phases into how we can increase voter turnout and making sure these votes are counted. So as noted, the API community is really one of the few in the nation where naturalized citizens outnumber those born in the United States. So to some degree, the idea of voting is something that has to be introduced, right, and reinforced and habituated, just like many other aspects of participation in American life, right? Maybe people didn't grow up with this idea that voting was something that you should do regularly. So not to generalize, but as the child of an Asian American immigrant family, I do feel like there's a cultural emphasis on sort of keeping your head down, working hard, earning a successful life, however that happens to be defined for you or for your family and loved ones. And I think that sometimes civic or legislative engagement isn't really part of that playbook that's presented to us as a means of that success. And I don't think it's often impressed on us growing up that civic engagement presents its own form of value. Additionally, I think that the thinking of Asians as a voting bloc kind of does a disservice because Asian voters are not monolithic, right? We're all not all the same. There's a lot of cultural, language, socioeconomic, geographical variations that can have a huge effect on turnout, right? And this doesn't only affect reaching voters, this affects voter engagement. It affects getting people to feel like there's a reason for them to care at all about elections, period, right? So things like language and translation assistance and cultural outreach are really important, of course. But also things like polling and analysis of different groups to see what issues they care about most, right? So it's not just putting out a bunch of flyers and hoping people will vote for you, but meeting them where they are. So we, in my campaign, are working on doing a lot of translation work, both in written materials and in phone banking, to have people who speak a lot of different languages that are predominant in this district reach out, because that's how you reach people, is meet them where they are. So this leads to the observation that I think not just my campaign, but all campaigns really need to prioritize Asian American outreach in elections. People vote when they feel engaged in the process. And unless we can invest in that engagement, right, we need to invest in it. We can't expect communities to invest in us, because why should we, right? Finally, one more thing is we need to make it as easy as possible for people to do the right thing, right? So I think few people would deny publicly that exercising the right to vote is the correct thing to do, and that the more people who participate in our democracy, the stronger it is. So really, one of the things that we need to work on is, in Georgia especially, is that we need to remove barriers to voter registration, including some of these borderline like voter purging tactics that selectively disadvantage voters with non-white or transliterated names, right? Names that are translated from some Asian other language to American characters. Talk to me about names that get habitually transcribed incorrectly, right? Asian people get that weirdly, the shorter your last name is, the easier it is to be misspelled. And I'm sure Jackie you understand this. I don't know why. 2 letters seems like it should be easy, but it's not. So, in terms of not disenfranchising voters, abandoning unjust voter identification practices, which tend to selectively discriminate against immigrants, and remembering that a state government's inability to accommodate communities of color that are different than them shouldn't translate into the infringement on that community's ability to vote.
Yeah, I like you brought up a lot of different themes. I think that are especially important in Georgia. I think, voter suppression and, things of that realm have been very hot topics in Georgia. And another thing I really like that you mentioned is the disaggregation of data. Because, it's hard to talk about Asian Americans because when you lump it all together, there's so much diversity and variety. And, that's part of the point of this podcast is we're going to explore those different things. And sometimes we do have to, take it as a whole. But so in your district, one of the things we have trouble with, though, is collecting this disaggregated data. Have you been able to find any disaggregated data? Like, how does that play a role in your campaign?
Sometimes it's hard to get that data quite specifically. Sometimes we'll do analysis based on voting rolls and people who have requested ballots just based on last name analysis, right? And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't, right? Like if you have a last name like Park, you can maybe feel pretty confident that they're Korean, but there are other names that are more ambiguous or that it's just not an absolute way. Really, the way we're trying to use that data is just, like I said, in terms of voter outreach. Like, how are we going to reach people where they are? What kind of languages do we need to be translating our material into? What kind of language skills do we need on the phone? Because basically, we need to engage with people so that they want to invest in us. So that's mostly the way we're using it, but also just seeing overall the trends in voter turnout and, voting histories and that kind of thing. It's interesting to see over time, but it's not the type of data that's truly that granular isn't all there, or it's not at least obvious for us to be able to see on a really, micro analysis.
So on the topic of diversity, and I know we mentioned this early in the first segment, we talked about like how your district in Georgia is not what most people perceive as the South, stereotypically. And so many people don't associate Georgia with being progressive in a sense. Have there been any social barriers to your candidacy that you've faced, like any sorts of like discrimination or anything like that?
Well, I will speak to one thing that's not specifically about being Asian, but is more about being a woman of color running in politics. So one thing I've noticed is that, in terms of barriers, as a woman running for office, and frankly, as a woman physician, even just in my regular practice at the hospital, is that people really seem far more concerned and challenged by the logistics of my choices than they do for some other people who are running for office. So for example, I get asked far more than other physicians who work regularly. I always get asked, who's watching my kids when I'm at work, or who is watching my kids when I'm doing campaigning? My spouse, who graduated from medical school the same year as I did, in fact, we were in the same class, could probably count on maybe one or two hands the number of times he's been asked that in the 17 years since we've graduated. I get asked it almost every day, right? So these are the types of things that it's not a problem for me because I've been working with it, but it's a perceived problem. Like, how can you possibly do this, I've also been told in a number of ways in terms of other barriers, both subtly and also pretty explicitly, that it's not yet my turn to run for office. I've been told a couple of times that I should wait another 5 or 10 years to build the proper credentials, build the proper pedigree and connections before it's my turn to run for state Senate level office. While meanwhile, lots of first-time male candidates with shorter CVs than mine are seen as natural fits, and people don't question that part at all. When there are not, back to this other point of representation, when there are not ready examples of people who look like you doing what you do, people conflate that with the expectation that you shouldn't be doing it either, right? Mm-hmm. And it takes some determination to push through that and to put yourself in a space where you're often made to feel like maybe you don't belong there, right? So I think that can feel discouraging, but I think it can also feel like a challenge. If you're that kind of stubborn person, it feels like a challenge. And there are those among us, myself included, who like to rise to that challenge.
Awesome. Well, I'm happy you're rising to that challenge.
Mm-hmm. Okay, on the subject of women and women of color, according to Rutgers Eagleton Institute of Politics, Of the 2,156 women state legislators serving nationwide, 47 of them are Asian American. Women in the Georgia legislature are underrepresented, as only about 31% of the Georgia legislature is comprised of women. But in the last 4 years, we've seen a record number of women run for office. So why do you think it's important that women, and more specifically women of color, are represented in government?
Great question. And I think that rise in women running sort of was spurred on by 2016 also, just to allude to our earlier question, is that people realized they needed to step up, and a lot more women felt like, well, this is our time, because they didn't like what they were hearing, and it just came to a head to the point where we realized that if we wanted the issues that were important to us to be addressed, we needed to get in there. So here's an important thing that I think I want to talk about in terms of representation in this particular age, and in this time of politics where people are talking about identity politics more and more. There are some, not me, but there are some that would take this issue of diversity and representation as a sort of tokenism, right? I've heard people say that. I've heard people say that about my candidacy, actually. And they use the term identity politics as though diversity is some sort of like box checking, like women, check. Women of color, check, like whatever boxes people feel like they need to check in order to prove they're diverse. And that they think that the fact of demographic heterogeneity is more cosmetic than functional, right? Some people feel that way. And they say that identity, like being a woman, being Asian, being whatever, is less important than being the quote best person for the job, right? What I think is that we really have to stop thinking about diversity in our representation as a superficial aspect. I think we need to talk more about the fact that a focus on diversity is in itself an investment, and that the value we obtain from that investment can't be replicated in any other way. So when I think of the type of diversity I'd bring to the legislature as the first Asian American woman in the Georgia State Senate, is I would bring the experience of growing up in an immigrant family. I would bring the cultural perspective of being considered a member of a quote model minority. We love that, right? When it fits the narrative, but also the experience of being otherwise and exoticized and frankly discriminated against when it's more convenient for society. These are things that we can read about and people can study academically, but there's no substitute for real lived experience in terms of our depth of understanding and what we can bring to the table from that level of experience.
Awesome. So when we talk on the topic of diversity, do you think that the factors behind these things, and we talk about identity politics a lot, how do you think these discourage people who are underrepresented to run for office? Because I know that that's a big issue, is that one of the things blocking greater diversity in government and the value we can then inherit from that are factors that set up blockades.
Yeah. I think when people don't have good role models to look to, and they don't have a good sort of set game plan to follow, that it feels discouraging because you feel like you have to start from scratch, which in many ways people who are trailblazers are doing things for the first time. They are trying to do it from scratch. So I think that one thing I would encourage people moving forward to do in order to make it less difficult for people in the future to increase representation of all types at the legislative level is to look towards mentoring and to help people follow in these footsteps, because it shouldn't have to be like reinventing the wheel every time an Asian person or a woman of color is running for office. There should be a mentorship program where we, specifically those of us who have succeeded in whatever our goals are, bring other people with us. And I think that should be one of the parts of public service, is increasing our numbers.
I love that. And so we want to touch back again on your previous answer. You talked about how there's value in you growing up in an immigrant family, and that how you would bring that to the Georgia State Senate. And so does your Asian identity influence any of the policy positions you stand behind? Because I know a lot of the reason why you're running for office is because of your background in public health and medicine, and that is the main way that motivates you to run for office, to make your state better. And we want to know, we're curious if your Asian identity plays a role at all.
I think probably the most important part of my Asian identity and how it plays into my candidacy is that I in speaking with voters and people in my community, I can really feel that there is incredible hunger in this community for elected representation that truly represents the full diversity of this area, right? Because we want a representative democracy, and a representative democracy should represent all of us. So it's not even so much that there's one specific like Asian issue, because we all, we shouldn't overestimate that different groups are that different. We all care about many of the same things, and this is borne out in even polling we've done. People care about healthcare. People care about education. People care about economic opportunity. Those things don't differ that much, and there may be some differences along the edges in terms of like, for example, I mentioned like language about immigration. This hits in different ways depending on the community you're speaking to, and very divisive language, in particular, very frankly racist language, does not play well in the Asian community because we hear you talking about us, and we don't like that, right? But on the whole, it's not so much that I think of myself so much as an Asian candidate, but that I want to be as good a representative for the community as I can. And part of that is that we have some similar backgrounds, and that type of lived experience is important.
Awesome. Well, before we let you go, Michelle, here in the SituAsian Room, all of our listeners know that we ask our interview guests a couple questions just about themselves. So I'm going to kick it off with, what do you think it means to be Asian American Pacific Islander?
That is such a tough question. I was thinking about this because I know you guys usually ask this question, and it does, again, give us the chance to talk about the richness of the Asian American experience. And also, again, the fact that the API community, just like any racial group or ethnic group in the United States, is not a monolith, right? There's no really one way to be an API in this country because we're not all the same. There's not one way, despite how people view us externally, there's not any one way that API individuals grow up, or how we raise families, or how we approach or view education or achievement. And there's no one way that we all integrate with American culture, right? And I think stereotypes that perpetuate the sense that we all share the same broad set of values or experiences really kind of do a disservice to the richness of this broad community or the diversity of the struggles we each face, right? So to me, what it means to be API is that there are some elements of shared cultural experience, but it's almost like being a really big extended family, which I suppose we kind of are, but one in which everyone's lived experience is a little bit different and we experience things in a different way, right?
I love that answer. Thank you so much.
Right, so food is often a bridge between people and a wonderful way to share one's culture with someone else. And so we want to know, what is your favorite Asian dish? And you don't have to pick one.
Now you're talking my language, because I love talking about food. So here, I was thinking about this too. Now that we've been living in this sort of like semi-quarantine life for, I guess, almost 6 months. I don't know how long you guys have been quarantined, but here it's been a while.
Yep.
Wow.
I feel like the dishes that I crave the most are ones that I can't make myself at home, right? Because so by necessity, obviously, we've learned to create a lot of our favorite Asian dishes at home or make do with takeout because that's just what we got to do because got to eat. But the one we really can't do either of these two ways, either by takeout or making it myself, is a hot pot. I don't know if you guys like hot pot. Yep. Like a really good like hot pot at a restaurant where they have like the plate and there's like the pot and you like put in all the vegetables and they have like the sauces and you can mix your sauce each different way. You can't just do that at home. Like I'm sure you could, like you could say like, you're going to say, oh, just go to H Mart and buy all these 90 things and buy these 90 sauces and do this. And no, I'm not buying any of that. It's too hard. And more importantly, I don't want to do that. Mm-hmm. Not the same as a restaurant, even if I did all that stuff. And I don't know how to make their broth so good. So
no, I agree.
It's not eating that until the restaurant opens back up. I actually think they are open already, but it's not a good idea. In this moment, I don't recommend it. And my kids love hot pot because I think it's like so amazing that they get to cook it at the table. And the place we go has each person has their own, so they can do it like their own way, customized, And it's the best. They feel like they're like so chef, like James Beard Award style. With their hot pot.
No, I feel that because, I also really miss hot pot and Korean barbecue because, you can try and replicate it at home, but you're going to spend so much money on all the ingredients. You're going to spend how many hours just trying to get the broth right. And it's not even going to be exactly the way that the restaurants do it. It's going to be all that time and money spent on something that's just half as good.
They have so many things. I don't know how they get so many different things to put in there, but I would never be able to do it. I don't even try gonna ruin everything. It's gonna be bad.
Okay, so my next question is, who is your AAPI role model?
Good question. I don't have just one, but I was thinking through the ones that I like or attend to, and growing up, especially when I was growing up in the 80s, there really were even fewer AAPI public figures. So we really noticed it when people would, make it big, like, when Connie Chung got to be like the anchor of CBS News or whatever network she was on. My parents were like going and saying, that kind of thing. So nowadays there's more. But one thing I really admire is Asian public figures who really push the envelope in what society has told them that they're supposed to be. So if I had to say one, just real quick off the top of my head, on the fly, I'd say Ali Wong. And I don't know if you guys know her, but she's like a stand-up and she's an actress, and she just had a movie come out on Netflix, I guess, last year. What's that actor's name?
Randall Park.
Randall Park.
Randall Park, right. I was like, Russell, no, that's not his name. That movie was so funny. I mean, an Asian American comedian, that's really something that you don't really see that much, right? And she's so confident and she's so brash and like unapologetic about how great she is at what she does. It's wonderful. So her first 1-hour comedy special, Baby Cobra, I think if you haven't watched it, you obviously need to. You guys have probably watched it already. And I recommend it as long as your sensibilities are not too delicate.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Ali Wong too.
Yeah.
I think she was a writer for Fresh Off the Boat. I'm not sure.
I think she was.
I believe she was.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, no, she's incredible. But our last question is, how can people connect with you and find more about you?
Okay. Lots of ways. So I am on all the standard social media platforms. I'm on Twitter. So it's at ow4ga. So just it's complicated. Do I even have this here? Okay, well, here's my email and stuff. So just the ow4ga is, you can see I'm very fancy with my special effects, but it's ow4ga is the Twitter handle, right? And that's the same on Facebook for my campaign page. And on Instagram, it's ow4ga because something got screwed up. Someone tried to set up my campaign Insta for me, and something got screwed up with the FOR one. So that's why. That's why it's number 4, just to make it even more confusing, as though the ow wasn't confusing enough. And also, of course, you can email me, which is, I guess, a form of social media in a sense, but only I can see it.
Yes.
I don't have TikTok yet because I am elderly, so I feel like I should not try these things. It's too much.
I'm in the same boat. Well, yeah. Thank you again to Dr. Michelle Au for taking the time to join us here in the SituAsian Room. Guys, if you are interested in anything that was mentioned during our interview, if you want to connect with Dr. Au, we are going to be including everything that was said in this interview in our show notes. So make sure to check out our episode show notes on our website, www.situasianroom.com. But yeah, thank you so much, Michelle. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, guys.
Her name was Emilie.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Dish It Out table. So last week, Zach and I brought some amazing dishes from our own cultures to the Dish It Out table. But this week, we challenged each other to look up some new recipes from different cuisines in the Asian American Pacific Islander community. So, as always, I'll go first. Zach challenged me to do some research on banh mi. And I'm so glad you gave me this dish, Zach, because I've been hoping to talk about banh mi for the longest time. This is a Vietnamese sandwich, and it's a staple in Vietnamese cuisine. Banh mi in Vietnamese actually means baguette. And the origin of this sandwich, it comes from the time when the French colonized Vietnam. And at the time, Vietnam was part of, French Indochina. And the French brought over baguettes and, different condiments to Vietnam. And the Vietnamese people took this and added their own twist, infused their own cuisine with it, and they came up with the banh mi. So this is a sandwich that starts off with baguette, and then it's stuffed with different meats and lots of vegetables. And I love it. I've had it before. It's so good. And the beauty of it is that you can customize it to whatever you want. Zach, have you had it before?
I love banh mi. Um, I know I think in the previous dish that we talked about like the grilled pork chops, but like that's my go-to when they put the grilled pork chops in the sandwich and they cut it up.
Oh my goodness, I didn't even
Oh,
think about that.
those are so
But
good. You got like
yeah.
the shredded pickled carrots and daikon on
Mhm.
there.
Oh, of
Um,
course.
there's a spread, right?
Yeah, so let me talk about the fillings of it. So usually start off with some sort of meat. A lot of times it's barbecue pork or pork chop, like you said, Zach. Sometimes it'll be shredded pork or grilled or broiled chicken. And sometimes some places even make it with sardines. Um, and then filled to the brim with vegetables. Cucumbers, pickled carrots, cilantro, lots of cilantro, which I love. Um, daikon radish, and then onions and chili peppers if you like that little heat to it. And then the sauces and condiments, usually it starts off with a layer of mayonnaise on the baguette, and then some sort of like uh, oil and salt and pepper. Some people include fish sauce with it, and then you top it off with fresh squeezed lime juice. And yeah, it's really good.
I love it. The Vietnamese restaurant by me, they call it like Vietnamese hoagies to like entice people who
I'm
do
surprised,
not
like
know what that is.
the
Uh,
Vietnamese place by me doesn't serve banh mi's.
oh
So
no.
the first time I actually tried banh mi was at school. And by the psychology department, when you're walking up to like the building, there is a food truck parked off to the side because at our school the psych department is attached to the health center, and they have a food truck out there every day of the week for all the doctors and the nurses that are working there, as well as the students that are on their way to class. And twice a week there's this banh mi truck parked right outside the health center, and I love it. I've tried, that's the first time that I tried it, so it's kind of weird that I got it from a truck, but nonetheless it was amazing. I got it with chicken, and a lot of places normally use chicken, but I really want to try it with pork. I've never tried it with pork before.
I love both. Actually, we had for like a family party, we catered Vietnamese food truck and they had banh mi. And
Really?
okay, banh mi out of a food truck is so fire.
Okay, I'm glad that you said that because people are probably going to watch this segment and be like, she got banh mi out of a truck. Yes, I did, and it was delicious.
I think one time, I think I had it Temple University, and like Temple University in Philly is known for like having food trucks outside, and it's like super cheap, like $5. You get like a drink and like a water bottle of soda, and then like
Yeah.
your meal. I had banh mi from a truck there also, and it was just so good. I think it's a thing. There's no evidence that this is a thing except my two experiences, but
I mean, hey, people say that food from a food truck hits different, it tastes better. They don't know what it is, but maybe just the experience of getting food from a truck.
I won't say it tastes better, but I will say that because it's out of a truck doesn't mean it's discounted for being good. But it
I'm
is in itself an experience.
Mhm.
Yeah. But banh mi is just so good. To clear up something earlier, if you're not from the greater Philadelphia area, you might not know what a hoagie is. No, because I remember like saying that to people and they're like, what are you talking about? And this is like the only region in the country that says that. But hoagie is just another word for like sub or grinder or long sandwich,
I mean, in New
hero.
York, if it's served hot, in New York, we call it a hero.
Yeah, I was gonna say hero. Yep. And yeah, but Vietnamese banh mi is so good. That's a favorite. I'm missing it. I should order some. But the dish you challenged me for, is bibimbap,
Yeah.
which means mixed rice in Korean. I hope I pronounced that right. I don't know any Korean, but it's a signature Korean dish. And it's like a mix of rice, vegetables, meat, and there's always like a sauce that's usually got a little heat to it. And the sauces, everyone has like their own different way of making it, but often it's made with like gochujang and sesame oil along with like soy sauce. So like those are very basic like East Asian and um, ingredients, and like gochujang is a signature Korean ingredient. And so a lot of other people use like vinegar, sesame seeds, sometimes like onion juice or onions and lemon juice. And then as far as like vegetables, the way they present it is always really interesting because it's like rice is on the bottom of the bowl and there's like sections, and the vegetables always have different colors, but they're like placed separately to make it pop.
It's so beautifully organized.
Yeah. So like carrots, cabbage, seaweed, shiitake, soybeans, or soybean sprouts, excuse me, zucchini. Some people use squash, and like separately fry it all up, and then like an egg in the middle. A lot of times people marinate beef and put it in. It's kind of like a fridge clearer, like get things out of the kitchen, like this is going bad. We got to make something with it. So it's a hodgepodge of like vegetables and meat, and it's, very healthy. And I think I'm going to try to make it.
Have you tried it before?
I have not.
So a lot of my, food experiences, the first time I've had bibimbap was again at school. Every once a week, our school does a farmer's market, and there's a bibimbap stand.
What?
Yeah.
How come I didn't know about the food truck or the bibimbap stand?
Not everybody knows about the food truck. The food truck is like if you're a psych major, a neuroscience major, or you either work at the health center or go there often, then you know about that food truck. The bibimbap stand, I don't know how you missed it. There's always a crowd by that stand.
Oh, that's probably why I didn't go.
And that's where I first tried it. And I tried the beef bulgogi one. So I did actually have it with the marinated beef. And it's so good. And I know that, it's a food stand. So, a bunch of students are coming in and out trying to order. And even though with that rush, it's still beautifully prepared. It's so aesthetically pleasing to look at. But it's so good. The extra vegetables that's, placed in that bibimbap bowl is just, it adds that refreshing element to it, which I love because the meat is pretty heavy and the rice is even heavier. But it's so good. And I'm guilty, like freshman year, I like walking past it and almost like most days I would be like, I should really get one. And most days I did end up getting one. But
farmers markets are a money hole. They're so fun. But
I know, guys, 3 years into university, and I hate to say that most of my money has gone to the farmers market.
There's nothing cheap there, but it's all really good stuff, high quality stuff. But as always, we believe that Asian American Pacific Islander dishes are only good if you share with others. And we just shared some awesome dishes outside our own cultures, and we'd love to learn more. So make sure to send us your dishes so we can feature them on Dish It Out. We'd love to do it, either on our website or here on the podcast segment. Send it to us via social media or submit it to us on our website.
Yeah, and guys, seriously, do check out the Dish It Out blog on our website. We post recipes, we'll post different dishes, video clips, anything about the dishes that we talked about, and more.
Thank you again to Dr. Michelle Au for joining us in the SituAsian Room. It was so much fun to talk to you, meet you, and we wish you the best of luck in your race. And thank you all for tuning into this episode. The SituAsian Room is produced by Crimson Planet Media as always. Make sure to check us out on our website, SituAsianRoom.com, and follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook at The SituAsian Room.
Guys, we mentioned this in the beginning of the episode, but don't forget to sign up for the SituAsian Room newsletter. Get all the updates on our show, as well as access to exclusive content by signing up on our website or by clicking the link in our show notes. Also, don't forget to show some love by liking and subscribing to us on YouTube or whatever platform you use to tune into our show. As always, we want to hear from you guys. So send us messages and recipes for Dish It Out through our website, slide into our DMs on Instagram, send us a message on Facebook, and let us know what you want us to talk about in the SituAsian Room. But once again, thank you for joining us on this step of our journey through Asian America. My name is Emilie Villaverde.
And I'm Zach Gang. So, same time next week.
Yeah, same place.
Let's do it.
Woo! Bye, guys.
Bye.
This has been awesome. All right. we're done. There we go.
Yay!
Thank you guys.